I tell leaders all the time, you're never going to get noticed because you're pretty good at a lot of different things.
That's so true.
The people that get noticed and break through are the people that are extraordinary at one big thing.
Hey everybody, James Ward here, and welcome back to Cultural Conversations, meeting cultural challenges with biblical solutions. And we got a lot of cultural challenges right now. We need biblical solutions, and I'm so grateful to have my dear friend and my brother, Phil Cooke, with us, a unique man who has not only media experience, but a PhD in theology.
Yeah.
So this is going to get very, very rich here.
Yeah, CNN says I'm the only working producer in Hollywood with a PhD in theology.
Yep.
I think they're right.
I love it.
Makes it a kind of an unusual spot.
Yep, two things that are very important to me and dear to my heart. So if you don't know Phil, I'm telling you right now, just get ready. Phil is a media producer, among other things, an author and a speaker, helping creative leaders and organizations share their message in today's distracted, media-driven culture. He's produced television and film in more than 60 countries and works at the intersection of faith, media, and culture. And again, this unique combination of media and theology is very, very unique. And you've worked with amazing studios, Disney, DreamWorks, USA Network, pretty much every Christian organization, Museum of the Bible, a mutual partner with us, Salvation Army, YouVersion, Bible app, and so many others. Folks, trust me, you want to find Phil on every social media platform. Go to philcooke with an E, .com, philcooke.com, and ingest all of his content. I promise you it will 10x or 20x your vision, and it'll serve as a catalyst for everything that you're doing. If you got a purpose, if you have a pulse, you want to go and find out about Phil Cooke and the great things that are going to happen here. So thanks, man, for coming.
Well, you're very kind. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Outstanding.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, sir.
We'll have fun.
Good deal. So before we dig into just content, tell us about Phil Cooke, the man. You know, I'm a firm believer. Sometimes folks can look at us and say, you know, I want to do what you do or emulate that, but we're human beings before we're human doings, and it all comes from the inside out. So tell us about Phil Cooke.
I'm a preacher's kid. My dad was a pastor in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I grew up behind the scenes in church my whole life.
Okay.
I mowed the cemetery. I filled 1 million communion cups. I've done it all behind the scenes. Never had a minute's calling to be a pastor, but I saw early on growing up in the church that the people just the general public doesn't have an accurate representation of what Christians really are. And part of it is because we don't tell our story well. Yeah. You know, most Christians just don't communicate very well. And I learned that early on. You know, I grew up in an era where pastors would say, I'm going to sit up on the roof until we get another 100 people come to visit our church. Or I'll shave my head if you can bring another 200 kids to Sunday school. Wacky stuff. And I would have kids in high school say, you know, why does Pastor so-and-so do such ridiculous stuff? And I'm thinking, that's not helping. And so I've always had this desire to help Christians communicate the gospel more effectively. And you're right, we live in a media-driven culture. It's the most distracted culture in the history of the world. Yeah. I saw a stat the other day that we touch our iPhones 265 times a day on average. Yeah. And I was on a plane flying up for this interview today, and I looked around and I saw one person reading a book. Everybody else had their phone or their iPad open, and they're watching movies or something else. So I just really have this strong passion that if we don't learn to speak that language as Christians, we're not going to impact the culture very well.
Huge, man. You talked about a distracted culture, the clutter. I mean, we're in content clutter right now. So how do you even begin to sort through and decipher content? Not all content is good content, and sometimes you got the bad guys who produce it really well, and the folks with good content and good messages, their production is bad, and so the viewership is not even a reflection of the quality of your content. So how do you navigate that?
The clutter is overwhelming. It really is. I think it's one of our greatest challenges, particularly in ministry today, and with leadership. Everywhere you go, you see competing messages out there. When my dad was a pastor in the 60s, we didn't have that. You know, you came to church on Sunday and there was no competition really. Today, oh my goodness, we compete against everything. And there's so many messages. One study from Great Britain says that the typical person today sees about 10,000 media messages every single day. Yeah. And in that world, it's not the best message that gets through. It's the message that knows how to cut through that clutter.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I spent so much time learning how to do exactly that. And
Right.
so the ministries, the churches we work with, we're always on point trying to help them make sure they maximize their message, they maximize their influence, because we have to do it in today's culture.
Is that level of engagement with technology, is it good, bad, or neutral?
Oh, I have mixed feelings about that. I think it's both, actually.
Yeah.
It's good in the sense that we have more ways than ever to get the message out there. It's bad in the sense that, I see every day statistics about kids encountering media. I think now kids as young as 9 are encountering pornography, mostly on their parents' phones, or 9-year-old kids are getting phones now. It's interesting that the tech titans like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs never let their kids have phones until they were grown.
Right.
They knew the dangers there.
You even hear about the Chinese not letting their kids use TikTok.
Yes. I was at the Sundance Film Festival a few years ago in Utah and saw a fascinating documentary that was Chinese about kids that get addicted to technology. And they literally, their parents have to have them kidnapped and taken to a camp where they get them desensitized.
Right.
And these kids go crazy when they're not around their phone or their iPad or their computer. They're gaming. They just go crazy. So I really saw firsthand how serious the addiction is for kids.
Yeah. We use the vision, and this is where I love being able to, have you put on your theology hat, the vision of Daniel and his friends. I often say they were in Babylon, but Babylon was not in them. They had deeper convictions. They referred to their Hebrew names, not their Babylonian names. And so it seems like the only way to navigate through that distraction, through that culture, which I think is a huge tool for the enemy for deception. We got to build better kids and build better people be able to.
And we've got to be intentional. I'm just stunned at the number of parents that don't have web filters on their computers at home. I never allowed my kids to have a computer in their room or a TV in their room. I wanted it out in the open where everybody can see what you're doing. And I don't allow, our grandkids now are going through the same thing, and we're not going to give them a phone. We gave our granddaughter a watch that she can call her dad if she gets in trouble somewhere at school or someplace. But other than that, we're limiting it.
I'm enjoying this because you're pastoring right now in the sense that an industry that you're in, that you're a leader in an industry, but yet you're managing that industry in a way that there's no compromise concerning the quality of your family.
That's really, no compromise at all. That's so true. And we have, and it's a battle. I'm not going to, it's a battle. Every day it's a battle, but it's out there. And I think our families are just too important not to fight like this. And so I just wish parents would be more intentional about technology in their kids. And I wish more pastors were more intentional about teaching their congregation about this. I think there's so much we could learn. It's interesting that Paul used the technology of his day, which was letters, to build the foundation of the church. And then in the 1500s, this obscure monk nobody ever heard about named Martin Luther discovered publishing and became, he completely changed the publishing industry and became the most read author of his time. And so I think it's interesting at the turn of the last century and at the turn of the 20th century, the American Bible Society in New York had 7 steam-driven printing presses. They had more than the New York Times had. They had more than other newspapers and printing houses had. But they were serious about using technology of the time. That was state-of-the-art printing technology for making Bibles. And I think we need, if we're going to be serious Christians in this culture we live in today, we need to seize technology instead of letting it seize us.
I want to talk about the digital revolution. But as I'm listening to you, the safety is learning how to do it well. In other words, you sometimes have, parents or grandparents or even pastors who are technology shy, don't think that they can keep up. The more you educate yourself, the better you're able to manage it and to protect your family and protect values.
It's so true. I grew up in a gun culture, in the South in the 60s and 70s. We would go out shooting, and in fact, some high schools I remember had a shooting club. They had a gun club in the high school. And boy, that world has changed dramatically. But it was a matter of learn how to use it safely. It's going to be around. Your dad's going to have a gun somewhere, so learn how to use it safely. And I think learning how to master something is really the key to safety these days.
So I mean, without question, I think the digital revolution is far greater than the industrial revolution. You've seen the phases of media change over the last few decades. Where are we going? Where do you? And I know it's a loaded question, but where do you see this going? The use of AI technology is mind blowing.
It is.
From your perspective, what's coming down? Pretty
Well,
soon?
what's interesting is it's everywhere. First of all, people need to understand it's everywhere. I filmed in probably 70 countries around the world. I have yet to go to a place that where people aren't using their phones. A Maasai warrior in the heart of the African bush has got a phone. A tribesman, a village, a remote village in the Amazon, they got phones. Nepal, you go as high as you want to go in Nepal, they got phones.
Wow.
So everybody's using it. So that it's a global phenomenon that's quite incredible. As far as where it's going, boy, if I knew that, I'd be a billionaire. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I'd be on an island somewhere.
Right.
But it's a big issue and a big question because it's going to be an interesting ride. We don't really know. I agree with you 100% that AI is changing everything. I mean, I've been tracking that recently and experimenting a lot with AI myself. And I've not gotten to where I'm letting it write anything for me. I'm letting it do research or maybe do a first draft of something, but I'm going to go in there and adjust it and change it. Somebody posted the other day that I want AI to do my dishes and clean the house and let me focus on writing my book, not write my book so I can still do dishes and clean the house. So, it's going to be an interesting thing.
Yeah. We're not just concerned about AI technology, but I call it AI theology because now it will give you perspective and give you theological commentary about Scripture. And if we don't protect a younger generation from accessing that and really checking the doctrine, it could really be a bad thing. Yeah.
I think more than ever, that's why doctrine, solid teaching is critical. It's funny. I went to a church. I won't say which one, of course, but I went to a church in Nashville, a very popular church, a couple Sundays ago, and just a friend wanted me to come and visit. Looked around. It was a satellite campus, maybe 300 people in the congregation. Looked around when they read the Scripture, and I was the only one there with the Bible. Yeah. The only one. And I even looked for people on their phones. Nobody even had their phone out.
Wow.
And I think we need to get really serious about the Bible right now.
I get really suspicious when I get software updates for my Bible software.
True.
What are you updating?
True. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. So even let's back up in the present concerning technology. COVID was a game changer. And lots of even pastors and communicators who were accustomed to standing in front of people, flesh and blood people, were forced into television production, media production. Some didn't translate well, but now on the backside, every church now has to be bivocational in the sense of in-person services and online ministry, whether you want to or not. Can you speak to that for a moment? Is that a fixture? Is that something that we just have to be accustomed to now?
I think it is. It's interesting that before COVID, I would have pastors tell me, well, Phil, I don't mind live streaming my service, but that's not real ministry.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, they changed their tune when churches were shut down, and they had to do it. And like you say, some really stepped up to the moment and did a brilliant job, and some churches closed because they could not. I saw one social media post by a pastor right in the middle of COVID saying, now, I'm going to be at the church on Wednesday afternoon with a basket. If you'd like to drive by and drop off a check. I thought he's dead in the water, man. He'll never survive this. But I think today what's frustrating for me is pastors feel like, okay, we're beyond COVID. We don't have to live stream anymore. We can back off on that. And I just don't think it's the way. And for me, it's not, okay, sure, I want people to show up. I think fellowship is important. Being in community is important. However, there's some people, we have a generation of people today that, first of all, want to check you out online before they'll ever come. So, in fact, I've discovered that in the churches that I'm working with, I'm telling them, look, if your website, what I've discovered is most people, the main reason they go to your church website is not to read your 5-page biography or your history. They just want to see what it's like because it may make them want to come. Well, let me tell you, if I tell pastors the single greatest purpose of your website now is to get people to make that decision to come and visit. What can you put on there that would make them think, wow, this is an experience I need to be a part of? So that's one thing. Live streaming, still, people want to see it. Like I say, I travel all over the world. And every Sunday, my wife will pop open her laptop, wherever we are in the world, and check out our church back home. How cool is that? That's fantastic. And I think of college students, business leaders that are traveling, and of course, shut-ins, old classic thing. But it's true. There are people that want to access your service online. I know a pastor in Oklahoma that has about 700 members, but he has 10,000 people that watch him every Sunday online. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah. I had a young guy tell me that gave me some perspective. I'm engaged in digital media, social media, but he framed it in a way that I never thought about it. And he says the number of followers that you have on one platform, he said that's a city.
That's true.
It's a city, and you don't think about it that way. You have 50, 60,000 followers that are and you get pretty engagement. You're actually talking about engaging a city, which I believe that to some degree maybe it was on God's agenda to use COVID to force the word to get out of the building, to reach the culture. Because think about it. Can the Great Commission really be fulfilled without technology? And so if we're ever going to do Matthew 24:14, preaching the gospel to the ends of the earth, technology is a huge part of that.
It's a huge part of it. Because you're right. We're never going to be able to reach everybody without technology. It's so
you said
true.
They got phones in Nepal. They got
Oh, they're going to put everywhere. I've never been a place, I don't think, where they don't. In fact, it's funny that one church I work with in L.A. had a family watching from the Netherlands, watching their live stream. And they loved it so much, they decided to fly to L.A. to get baptized at that church. Now they've moved to L.A. just to be a part of that church. So I think people don't realize the impact live streaming has on people. So, stop hanging a camera from the balcony rail. Use it effectively, put it in a good place, treat that audience seriously because they are a legitimate congregation. And so we need to just not blow them off. I even have pastors when I'm working with churches, I'll have pastors during praise and worship step off to the side, look at a camera and welcome the live stream audience to the service. And that makes them feel like, oh, wow, this church really appreciates me, and I'm a part of this church. So, as I say, I wish everybody would come and get together, but it's not going to happen, so let's do what we can.
Yeah, I agree. One of the most humbling experiences if I go out to speak at conferences or I'm doing a book signing is, folks come up to me with tears in their eyes. Never met them before. I'm from, Brazil. I'm from Argentina. I'm from Costa Rica, and my life has been changed by watching your services.
Wow.
It's humbling, to see how lives are being impacted. And they identify with you through the medium of ministry. Last thought about that is just, again, speaking to the quality of it. In other words, you can have great fiery content, but if the audio is fuzzy and the camera angles are shaking. So excellence in media for the sake of ministry. What would you say to encourage pastors?
I think it's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical.
But they don't have the budget now.
No, and you don't have to. You just have to know some simple things. Where to put the camera. Don't make the camera look down on you. It makes you small. Don't make it look up on you. It makes you look overweight, which pastors are concerned about. Look at it eye level. There's so many things like that. But excellent. And the thing is today, when I joke that when my laptop breaks, I don't go to the Mac store. I find a teenager. They know how to fix it. So I tell pastors, if you don't have the budget, find a teenager in your congregation. They know how to use social media. They know how to use video. Talk to them about it and at least get some input because it can make a dramatic difference.
So rich. Folks, thanks for joining Cultural Conversations with my friend. I told you already, 10X, 20X, it just happens when Phil speaks. It's always like a catalyst and an amplifier for purpose and engagement. Make sure you go to philcooke with an E.com. There's all kinds of resources there. Phil has written some amazing best-selling books that you certainly want to get your hands on. Tools and resources to help leaders be empowered to accomplish the things that we're talking about right now.
I'm really big right now on helping leaders lead creative people more effectively. Because when it comes to ministry these days, you need a great graphic designer. You need a video person. You need a social media person. Even if you're in a small church, it really helps to have even volunteers. But most pastors at seminary, they don't teach you how to lead.
I'm glad you're speaking to that
people.
because, we pretty progressive church here, but the staffing for communication directors and, content creators, social media managers, traditionally pastors don't think that way.
Yeah.
But you're encouraging that you have to staff your church in those areas if you want to
Yeah, it's very frustrating to
level.
me that, in fact, it's funny that there's a lot of Christian film schools. I've done a lot of teaching and lecturing at a lot of Christian universities around the country. And when they do have film departments or video departments or media departments, they're training up kids to go to Hollywood, which is great. I'm okay with that. But most of them end up at Starbucks. I think they should be training kids to go to work as media professionals in churches.
Yeah.
There's always been that thing in Hollywood that when people won Grammy Awards, they would say, I got my start singing in church. I'm waiting to see someone accept an Oscar and say, I got my start directing video for my church.
Yeah, so good, man.
I think there's just some powerful stuff out there.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see, even, maybe in that last, 10 years or so, the quality of Christian content has gotten so much better. There was an era then
yes,
you just didn't want to have anything to do with Christian.
Oh, don't get me started.
You didn't want to have anything to do with it, but the quality has gotten so much better now.
It has. It has. And I think churches have really stepped forward. And finally, I think pastors are understanding that media matters. If we're going to engage this culture effectively, we need to really tell our story more effectively.
Right. So, I mean, Phil, what does it take? You've produced commercials for Super Bowl. I mean, at the highest level. What does it take to engage? What does it take to get a phone call from a major, corporation asking for your services? Where did you start? How do you get there? And even for any producers that have a vision to improve, what would you tell them just in terms of some coaching and the steps and the layers that they need to go through to move to achieve at that level?
It's funny. I started in the days of Super 8 movies. My dad, our family made Super 8 movies, 3-minute little reels, film reels. And I had a group of guys in college that we decided to go make some movies. And we had it never occurred to me that you could do this for a living. We just really enjoyed it. So we made Army movies and space movies and mafia movies, whatever you wanted. We made all these little 3-minute films. And when I went to college, I thought, well, maybe I'll find somebody that wants to make films. I didn't think about majoring in film. Right. And so I took them with me. A kid across the hall, when I'm unpacking, a couple of them fell out of my suitcase, and a kid across the hall said, hey, I'm taking a film class. I'll show you how to edit those things. I didn't even know you could cut film. And he took me down. We did. I met the film professor that night. He looked at my little movie. He said, man, I got kids taking 2 or 3 years that don't do this well. Could I show this film in your class, in my class tomorrow? And I said, sure, if I could sit on the back row. So I did, and he showed my little movie, and it was nothing to scream about, trust me. But he showed my movie, and at the end of it, they discussed it. They talked about it. And this thought hit me. I've never had such a crystal clear moment of revelation before or since that if I can do something with a camera that makes people talk like this, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. I was a music major at the time because I played piano. That was a job description when you're a preacher's kid. And I changed my major that day, and I've never, ever looked back. Now, I went to Oral Roberts University that had a pretty sophisticated film department, and this is back when Oral was alive and doing primetime TV specials. So I got on the crew I was moving sets around, setting lights, doing whatever I could. So I really worked my way up. And I encourage people, get a job, at a local TV station or an advertising agency or a church. Volunteer at your church and run camera. Learn. I've got. Put it this way. I've got churches that I've worked with over the years that we train volunteers who are now professionals in their city. We went to Miles Monroe's church in the Bahamas years ago. He asked me to come down and train his team. They had a girl that wanted to run camera. They said, don't just ignore her. Don't pay attention. She's not got any talent. Well, I noticed she did. And I started working with her. Now she's one of the highest paid camera operators for sports television in all the Bahamas. And so a church is a great launching pad for your career if you take it seriously. So I'm a big believer. If you can go to college and study it, great, but it's not life and death. I just say get out there and start making things. If I could change something about my career, it would probably be earlier. I would have taken more risks and created short films, independent films. I wish I'd have done that sooner.
So, I mean, I'm sure you could talk extensively. You just mentioned a few moments ago talking about you discovered your purpose.
Yes.
And you wrote a book, One Big Thing.
Yeah.
You talked about discovering what you were born to do.
Yeah.
That's a loaded topic, and I find sometimes in a pastoral sense, many people are not comfortable with that conversation because it can potentially set you up for discouragement and disappointment if you either don't know what you were born to do or you've lived a life doing so much of something that doesn't interest you or that you're not going to do, but it's too late to recover.
Yeah.
So what would you say to encourage folks about discovering that?
I had met so many people that were now in their 60s, 70s, and said, Phil, I've been okay. I've had a job in my life, but I've never really known what I was put on the earth to do.
Yeah.
And I thought that's so sad. And so in the book, I talked about some very simple things like, I've done a lot of sports television early in my career. I shot a lot of boxing, a lot of basketball, full contact karate, all kind of stuff for ESPN and other networks. And whenever I would meet a professional athlete, they would always say, well, I was just the fastest guy in my neighborhood. Yeah. Or I could always catch the ball nobody else could catch. And they discovered early on what they were really good at doing. And what happens is, if you remember in high school, when you were on the prom committee, you sat around a table and everybody said, well, Bob, you're creative. Why don't you come up with a theme?
Right.
Susan, you're good in front of people. Why don't you host it? Sam, you're great with numbers. Why don't you do the bookkeeping? Other people notice what we're good at before we ever do very often. We just don't think about it. And so I say go back and start thinking about what people have said about you your whole life, because other people notice, and start taking that to heart. And it's not a magical, weird thing. It's not complicated. Just start focusing on what you're better at than most people. I think, all of us are good at something that most people around us aren't that good at. Yeah. Well, maybe that's something God put in us to help us, really be unique. I just think that, I tell leaders all the time, you're never going to get noticed because you're pretty good at a lot of different things.
That's so true.
The people that get noticed and break through are the people that are extraordinary at one big thing.
Yeah.
And it may be as a writer, it may be as an artist, it may be as a leader. For instance, I know even leadership can be in different niches. I know one leader. He's unbelievable at going into troubled organizations and fixing it. Once it's fixed, he leaves. Yeah. And he goes to another troubled organization. I know others that are great at launching things. They're not good at managing it, but they're brilliant at launching things. Yeah. So finding that narrow kind of niche that you're amazing at is really a critical thing, I think, for leaders.
Yeah, we're going to take a break here in a moment,
Sure.
but I want to pick up on that idea and go a little bit deeper.
Okay.
That purpose is as unique as our fingerprints.
Yes.
That's just how God made us and how the Lord wired us. And I want to get into talking about branding a little bit. And
super.
Once you discover that purpose, but then how do you manage it? How do you steward that purpose to cut through the distraction and the culture, the content clutter, and all those things? And so we got to unpack all those things, folks. I'm here with Phil Cooke, an amazing leader, a thought leader, and a pioneer in the area of media. Not just in Christian, media, but also in business. You certainly want to go and visit Phil's website at philcooke.com. Follow Phil on all of your social media platforms. I'm telling you, if you've been listening, you're sensing already that his words, his vision, his passion becomes a catalyst to help mobilize you, in the destiny that God has given you. And that's your passion. That's your heart. That's coming through loud and clear. Thanks for joining us on Cultural Conversations. Meeting cultural challenges with biblical solutions, and this idea of using the Word of God and using theology to deal with the challenges we're having today. We're going to talk about that some more as well. Media is needed because you can shape a generation. Whoever controls the messaging controls a generation, and Phil's going to help us understand that more. We'll be right back. Friends, I want to thank you for supporting Cultural Conversations podcast, Meeting Cultural Challenges with Biblical Solutions. My aim is to restore the art of respectful dialogue in dealing with the tough issues of our day from a biblical perspective. To see and listen to more great talks and interviews with interesting, inspiring, and intelligent people, visit tlnmedia.com/cultural conversations. And be sure to subscribe, like, and share our content with as many people as you can. It helps us out and helps us to help you by bringing you more great content. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching. In the heated climate of hatred and division, we need people who live life from the inside out, who function like thermostats to change the environment. Zero victim thinkers are thermostats who act and never react to the environment. Victim lenses can also serve to create a self-defeatist attitude I consider their words to be proof that they are struggling with victim thinking, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Boy, does America need that verse of scripture today. The purpose of this course is to equip and empower individuals to maximize and optimize God's potential for their lives. Now, let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the second half of the program here at Cultural Conversations, meeting cultural challenges with biblical solutions. Here with a dear friend that we just connected years ago. And sometimes you meet people and it's like, you know, you're supposed to be together and working together. And I'm so grateful that Phil Cooke has come on up to Chicago to hang out with us for some time. And we sat down to talk and share the wisdom and just share some insight about what's happening in the media space, what's happening in the business space, what's happening in the world. And we left off talking a little bit about purpose. Everyone has a purpose. God communicates that in Jeremiah chapter 1. And this idea, I think that purpose, again, is as unique as a set of fingerprints. Could you speak to the idea?
Sure.
I believe that the greatest and the worst thing that ever happened in the world is people.
That's true.
So people, when the enemy wants to bring destruction, he raises up people. But when God wants to bring about salvation, he raises up people. He works through people.
True.
So what would you say to those who are maybe not keen on figuring out their purpose, not understanding that they are part of God's solution, they are part of God's plan of salvation to actually bring about a change in the world that we desperately need right now?
Well, I deal with leaders for a living, mostly creative leaders, people who are pastors, ministry leaders, nonprofit leaders who really have a powerful message they want to share with the world. Mm-hmm. And so, and it could be an artistic leader, it could be, a writer, producer, director, those kind of things. And I learned early on that part of the problem with this distracted culture we live in is that it's really hard to get noticed. It's incredibly difficult to get on the radar. It wasn't this way 50, 100 years ago. It's really hard today simply because there's so many movies out there, so many television programs, so many churches, so many pastors, so many books. How in the world do you stand out and get noticed? One of the things I started noticing, as I said earlier, was you're not going to get noticed by being pretty good at a lot of things. You'll get noticed when you become known for what I call one big thing. And, it's for years and years and years, the woman that owned the most Grammy Awards was not Barbara Streisand, Aretha Franklin, Beyonce, Celine Dion. The woman that had the most Grammy Awards for decades was Alison Krauss, the bluegrass player, because she so dominated her niche that every year when they announced the Grammys, she walked off with all of them. Wow. And I learned, and now she's gotten so famous because of that. She's done a rock album with Robert Plant. She's done a classical album. She can do anything she wants now because it's made her so famous. So I've discovered that instead of trying to be all things to all people, my pastor for many, many years in California was Jack Hayford. I've heard Jack preach 1,000 different sermons, but if you cut Jack, he bleeds worship. He wrote 5 worship books. He wrote 100 worship songs. He led the worship at our church. We never had a worship leader. He led the worship. He was a horrible singer, but he's a brilliant worship leader. Whatever he preached on, it could be forgiveness, family issues, finances, revelation, whatever. He did it through the lens of worship. So I tell leaders today, find that thing that you wake up thinking about in the morning, you go to bed thinking about at night. What are you most driven? If I put a gun to your head, said you could only do one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be? And then start thinking about, okay, how do I live through that? That's the purpose for my life. And so it doesn't mean you live in this narrow thing. It actually expands you a lot because, like I say with Jack Hayford, he's preached on a million different topics, but he does it through that lens. And I've just discovered that that's what puts people on the radar and gets them noticed in this exceptionally distracted culture we live in today.
Right. So you're setting up this talk and this idea of branding.
Yes.
For years, I think branding was considered kind of a curse word, a dirty word in a ministry setting. I read a scripture, Romans, I think 16:25, that really helped me put this in perspective years ago. And it's in that passage that Paul says, God will establish you through my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, what does Paul mean, my gospel?
gospel.
Isn't it the gospel of Jesus Christ? Of course it is.
Yes.
But Paul says, God will establish you through my gospel
Yeah.
and the preaching of Jesus Christ. And we see God using Paul's personality,
Yeah.
his brand, the epistles of Pauline, the theology
Yes.
of Pauline. Paul never claimed to be Jesus, but the Lord used his personality, the way that God wired him
Yes.
to mobilize the gospel. What would you say
Absolutely.
concerning that idea of brand, and how do you use it and not shy
Yeah.
away from it? For the person that says, you know what, I'm just kind of behind the scenes.
Right.
I don't want to draw any attention to myself. I just want to give God the glory. What do you say to individuals like that from a leadership perspective and the need for their influence and as light in a very dark world?
Well, think about when, we're talking about pastors and teachers here for a minute. Think of all the teachers and the pastors you know of and the ones you particularly like. You probably like them. They're all preaching the same gospel.
Yeah.
They're just doing it in a different way. They're doing it in a different style. They're doing it, some guys are real men's men, outdoors guys, and they kind of preach from that perspective. Other people are really passionate. I had one pastor in the Midwest that had a thing for reaching men. He really wanted to reach men with the gospel. So he would do commercials on local television in a hard hat at a construction site and talk about rebuilding your life. He wanted to tailor his ministry to try to reach the target audience he was trying to reach. Yep. So sure, certainly you can go just preach the gospel, but I've discovered that people who discover, okay, what is it about me that makes me different from everybody else? What is my passion, my expertise, my experience, my background? What are all those things? My dad was a pastor, but he also fought the Japanese in World War II in the Pacific Theater in Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. And then he became a Golden Gloves boxer. And then he became a pastor. And so he had an interesting route, but that made him really unique and different. His take on the scripture was quite different. So I just think find those things that you're super passionate about, that you love, and lean into that. Don't be afraid of that. People love to follow people they like. And there are people that like Joyce Meyer. There are people that like Billy Graham. There are people that liked, that like all kind of different people. T.D. Jakes. There's all kind of just, in my career, you see the following they have. They just like their take on things. So I would say take the time to sit back and think about, okay, how am I different? Paul was that way. You're exactly right. In fact, I've been reading recently the Gospels, and you look at the different take each one of those writers had on the same story. They're telling pretty much the same story of Jesus' life and ministry, but they're dramatically different. Yeah. And and it doesn't mean, a lot of people look at that and think, oh, I've got to walk away from the gospel because it can't be real. Actually, that's what makes me understand it's real. These are real people writing about this. So true. But they did a different take. Matthew, his audience was different than Mark and Luke. It's interesting to study.
Yeah. It's exciting when you discover that, and it's really humbling when you find out that there are people out there that want to hear from you the way that you say it.
Yes.
And they're incredibly forgiving about what could be your personality, qualms and things like that, the idiosyncrasies. Yeah. That's part of what makes you you, and they identify with them. And so it's really important to give yourself
you mentioned my social media. When people go to my social media, first of all, Instagram, I apologize for that ahead of time because I post a lot of crazy stuff. I've often thought, I keep asking people, look, I should be like other people and just post one thing and stick to that. Yep. They said, no, but that reflects who you are. You love crazy stuff. Yep. And so find out what it is that makes you tick. Lean into that and run with it with all you've got. I think it's great.
Yeah. You talked over the years about reinventing yourself. And so even when you discover a brand, your voice, your perspective, your ministry in your 20s is going to be different than your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, not to mention the shiftings in terms of the cultural, norms and the environment. What's the importance of evolution in your brand, of not being dated or outdated, being antiquated in your thinking? How do you stay young at heart and relevant concerning the things that are happening in
I've done
society?
that 3 or 4 times in my career. I remember in my early 40s, I looked around, I started looking around, seeing the work that other producers and directors were doing was a lot more contemporary, a lot more relevant, a lot more hip than what I was doing. And I was stuck. What often happens is we get stuck in the way of doing something when we got some acclaim for it. Yeah, maybe you won an award, or maybe people, you had a surge in membership at your church. Yeah. Well, we decided we're going to do that for the rest of it. That worked. I'm going to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. But, God never changes, but trust me, everything else does. People change, culture changes, trends change, society changes. And so we have to change with it. So what I did in my early 40s was I started surrounding myself with younger talent, creative people, camera operators and lighting people and writers, and leaning on them and getting their advice about stuff completely changed my perspective, and our business took off.
Yep.
So I think we always, I do it every year, sit and have a little, we call it a brand refresh sometimes. It's just minor things we need to fix, update, but I'm always looking for what am I getting stuck at doing? What ruts am I in that I need to break out of? So important. I think pastors are the same way. We wonder, I find pastors that are ministering to 25 people and have been doing that for 30 years. And I think something needs to change there. Something needs to change. And so, and I'm not dissing on pastors of small churches, because I was on the board of the Salvation Army, and they have little bitty churches in very tough places in the world, in inner city areas and places that are just tough. And I get that and I love it. But I think just look back and think, if things haven't changed in my ministry for a while and I'm still running the same number of people doing the same old thing, maybe I need to have a second look at this.
But you don't get that without inviting dissension.
You don't. You'll get some critics. Well, that's going to happen. One thing I've discovered is if every church in America that's effective is going to have critics. They're going to have disgruntled ex-church members that go on Facebook and take out a whole Facebook page just for the purpose of criticizing that church. I know one church out west that this guy has a blog he created. He's an ex-staff member of that church. And he's taken out a blog, and all he does every Sunday is blog about how terrible that church is. And so you're going to get it. It's going to happen, but you got to punch through that.
So talk a little bit about strategy. You're big on strategy planning. In other words, if you're going to navigate, reinvent yourself, be forward thinking, you got to be keen on strategy and checking trends, reading data and things like that as well.
I worked for a television ministry many years ago where the pastor would come in on Monday and tell me what his barber told him he liked about the show. And so he'd want to change the whole show just because of what his barber liked. And, you have a mother-in-law, a person that loves what you do, but you need to be hearing from more people than that. So number one with strategy is you need to talk to a number of people. Surround yourself with people who are very sharp, very intuitive, get what's happening in the culture, and get them involved in that conversation. And, the old saying about, if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? You got to have a vision for where you want to go. I think that vision, when Walt Disney built Disneyland in LA, I had a friend years ago who started his career as Walt's intern. And he ended up as a very successful movie producer in LA, but he told me one time, he said, Phil, Walt was obsessed with doing it bigger and better. He always wanted to do it bigger and better. And he said, even before Walt finished Disneyland in LA, he was already thinking about how we could do this bigger. And so as soon as they were, broke ground or cut the ribbon in LA, they went to Orlando and started working. But a lot of people don't realize Walt got cancer and passed away before it opened. Well, on opening day, the grandstands were set up, celebrities were going by, they were doing parades, cutting ribbons, and Walt's widow was there. And she was sitting kind of alone in the stands, and she was obviously despondent because Walt, wasn't there. And one of the young executives, trying to be comforting, leaned over to her and said, it's such a shame Walt can't be here to see this. And without missing a beat, she leaned back and said, oh, no, you don't understand. Walt saw it. That's why it's here. Walt saw it. That's why it's here.
The power of vision.
I just really believe that having that kind of vision for your life or ministry is absolutely critical. Not in a weird, new agey kind of way, but just seeing where you feel like God's taking you and start making plans now for how to get there.
But Phil, where do you find the balance? It takes courage, a tremendous amount of courage to be that forward thinking. But at the same time, for those who may not really have a grasp and maybe ambitious about some things, talk a little bit about the distinction between vision that's achievable versus just vision that's something that's unachievable. And sometimes folks just have wishful thinking. It's I have no plans to play for the Chicago Bears and to be on the front line and be in the NFL. Like, I don't have any plans. That's not realistic. Closed,
I'm afraid.
Right. So just speak sometimes to how do you measure that potential and that vision in terms of what's achievable to not you know, strive for something that's really not realistic.
Well, God, you never know what God could do in a situation, but I think He also trusts us to have the wisdom to pursue it well and intelligently. And I think that, I have young filmmakers come up to me all the time and say, well, Phil, I want to be a film director. And I say, well, have you enrolled in a film school? Well, no, I really don't have time for that. Well, are you studying it? Well, no, I don't really like reading very much. Well, hello. I wouldn't have brain surgery with a doctor that didn't have time to read and study the literature.
That's right.
Or go to medical school. So I think that you need to have a plan. So many people want to be a famous business leader. They want to be a famous pastor. They want to be a famous something, but they just don't have the drive to make it happen. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, you've got to, being in the trenches. I know pastors that were in the trenches for 30 years before they finally got really recognized and broke out. And so many today, we live in this instant gratification culture where people just think, I want to be a film director. Why can't I do that tomorrow? No, you got to put in the work. You got to be willing to have the courage and the stamina and the persistence to do it. It's hard.
It is. So there's a thought, the power of media, the need for media concerning the church's influence as light in a dark world.
Yes.
We're in a place right now that socio-politically, the issues of our day are pressing. They're dominant. Even right now, this last election cycle, you're seeing a battle, what I call ideological warfare. True. That's how I describe it. And even the new civil war is not the North versus the South. It's a civil war of ideas. Our nation is just about as polarized, as divided as it ever has been ideologically. Phil, what's the role of media? And I asked that question because we saw, go back again to this last election cycle, a shift from legacy media to independent journalists, content creators, YouTubers, shifted the socio-political landscape of our society.
They did.
How critical is media, and how critical is media to the church in terms of influencing our nation spiritually and morally?
I think it's super encouraging, and because the interesting thing about the election was that, one of the influences Trump had was that his son said, "Dad, you got to go on some podcasts, man.
Yeah.
You got to get more hip. You got to do these younger things." And he went on Joe Rogan and other shows, and that had a huge impact on a whole generation. And suddenly we're finding out the biases of legacy, mainstream media. Was pushing one way, and we're seeing other things happen out there, particularly when they, were covering for Biden's obvious, his failings and his problems mentally, but his age. But I think what we've seen out of that is the power of a phone. We think, I know pastors that they will get on their phone and just do. I did a thing. Greg Laurie, pastor in L.A., called me one day. Wanted to do a thing for men, a video for men where they talked about men stuff. Well, Greg has a copy. He's got a replica of Steve McQueen's Mustang from the movie Bullet. And so I said, bring it to Newport. We went down to Newport Beach. We tricked it out with cameras. We put him and another guy in the car to talk about men stuff. And we got a drone to follow him going down the Pacific Coast Highway, talking about that in this cool 60s Mustang. And while my crew was rigging out the car with cameras, he just pulled his phone out and put the car behind him and said, "Hey, Phil Cooke and I are here getting ready to do this show for men." That thing just blew up. It just blew up. And so we've realized the power. If you have a phone, you're a media company now. You are a media company. And so and when I started out in this business, a single camera, a broadcast television camera, cost $250,000. Today, my phone puts out a better picture than that thing ever did. And so now, and we're seeing that media, social media influencers today are making more than Hollywood celebrities are. And so, but they take it seriously, and they're on there regularly. And so I just think it's incredibly encouraging. I work with churches where the pastor's assistant has more followers than the pastor does, or the guy at the loading dock has more followers than the pastor. So it's very democratic from that perspective. Anybody can do it, but you've got to take it seriously and go after it. But that's super encouraging, because that means the church can embrace this. We don't need a television network anymore. It's like we don't need Fox or CNN or MSNBC. We don't need them to get our voices out. We can get our voices out in other ways. It's powerful.
It's recognizing that the phone is, I call it the new mission field.
It is.
and to be stirred with to move the gospel, you have to do it. Whether you're comfortable with doing it, whether it aligns with your personality or not, it becoming a conviction for the souls that are on the other side of that device. Yeah.
And also the people on the other end are becoming obsessed with their phones. Like I said, on a plane, that's all people do. It's funny, if you go on YouTube, you can find videos of people so obsessed with their phone, they get hit by cars, they fall into ditches, they run into signs. We were filming in Berlin, a few years ago, and a guy was so obsessed with his phone, he walked right into a canal.
Yeah.
And I see it happen all the time. And I'm told some cities in Europe are experimenting with padded utility poles.
Yeah.
So many people are hitting it. And so, in fact, I think I've heard the legislature in New Jersey and Hawaii are discussing outlawing texting while walking. It's become such a thing.
Right.
So I'll tell you, this is the moment. This is the moment. People are looking at their phones all the time. Let's get a message of hope out there.
Get them saved before they walk off the cliff. Those last few seconds. So this idea. You understand the crisis that's happening in the world. I talk about meeting cultural crises with biblical solutions, and the world is chaotic. I tell our team, we have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. We're in the business of managing the chaos. You see the Holy Spirit in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, hovering over the chaos to bring order. What would you say to leaders right now, especially of being in the business of managing the chaos? Things will not become more simple. They will not become more orderly. Paul talks about that in the last days: perilous times, calipos times, fierce times, lion-like times are going to happen in the last days. The world will only become more and more and more chaotic.
It will.
What would you say to leaders, and even in their organizations, about learning to manage that chaos and kind of get their arms around it and the significance of that?
It's true, and elections aren't going to solve that. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. No matter, we want to be politically involved. We want to do what we can. However, I do think that I think the key for Christian leaders in particular is get back to the Bible. I think we're not doing a great job of teaching people the Bible. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly doing interviews with people. And asking them questions that people just have these myths about the Bible. They don't, I saw somebody the other day told me, well, God is love. Jesus talked about love. So I love everybody, and I'm not against abortion. I'm not against Islam. I'm not against anything else because we're supposed to love people. Well, excuse me, that's completely wrong.
Right.
So we need to teach the Bible, get people grounded better first. And next, I think we do need to understand how to use media more effectively. We need to learn to be masters at it. And you can do it. There's a lot of ways online. You can go, like you said, go to my website, and I do a lot of teaching on that, but my books. But I do think that learning how to do it, learning how to teach our kids to do it well, managing it well, because if we don't master the media, it will master us. There's no question about that. And like you say, and I'm also a big believer in where you get your news from matters. And we're seeing that a lot with social media. A lot of people today are getting their news from Twitter, X. They're getting their news online, and that's okay. That's fine as long as you're careful. I wrote a blog post not long ago on how to curate your social media feeds. Okay. Sometimes we need to go and edit our social media, who we follow on social media. Yeah. When you think about it, the people we follow are speaking into our lives more than anybody else because we check social media so often. So I say every once in a while, let's take a break and go in there and eliminate some of the voices we're hearing and maybe add more healthy voices, more biblically oriented voices into that conversation, because that has more effect on people than we think. That's really important.
I'm reminded of Jesus telling his disciples, what I tell you in the hearing of the ear, he said to shout it from the housetops. And what license to leverage media, those of us who are in the business of curating the message and communicating the message, but the partnership with media leaders to mobilize that message is the only way the Great Commission can be fulfilled.
That's good. Wow. That's really good.
What can you tell in our last few moments here? Just what's burning on your heart right now? What are you writing? What are you working on? What are you messaging right now? But what's the thing that's burning in your heart?
I've got a couple things. I just wrote a book called Church on Trial: How to Protect Your Congregation, Mission, and reputation during a crisis, because
Huge.
every time we turn on the TV, we're hearing about some pastor,
Yeah.
some church, some ministry leader who's fallen, convicted of abuse or alleged abuse, all kind of situations. And this is something else they don't teach in Bible college or seminary, what happens when a crisis is going to happen in your church. And with social media, that's another thing. There's so many opportunities for terrible things. Somebody's going to say something inappropriate or stupid. Somebody in your team is going to make a mistake. Somebody in your team is going to do something wrong. And we need to be ready to handle it. And I think it's not if a crisis will happen, it's when it's going to happen.
And even to recover when it happens, you can find forgiveness in the eyes of God.
Yeah.
But you can't find forgiveness on social media.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it could come from, and early in my career, I started getting calls, I guess because I was viewed as the communication guy. I started getting calls from churches going through a crisis. And so I've helped over the years just a ton of churches navigate these situations. So I decided to put it all into a book so pastors and leaders could have it as a reference. But I've just discovered they're never ready. They always think, nothing will happen to us. Mm-hmm. But you've got too many on your staff. You've got too many in your congregation. We live in such a volatile world. And it could come from so many places. Sometimes it's outside. It could be cancel culture protests.
Right.
Somebody doesn't like what you're preaching. Yeah. It could be a kid that breaks his leg on the playground.
Yeah.
Or it could be, a moral issue with a staff member. It could be sexual abuse. So many things.
Yeah. An unwarranted accusation. I think back to the Brett Kavanaugh trial.
Yes.
Just an accusation can ruin your life.
It can.
Which is again, in a media world, you have to be mindful of that.
It's incredibly tragic. Yeah. It can. And also, there's something that really bothers me a lot recently in the Christian community is we've got so many heresy hunters out there online that are determined to find out what you did wrong, and I'm going to bring it to light. And we're seeing, I'm serious, obviously if there's true sin, serious sexual abuse or something like that, absolutely it needs to be made public. However, in our glee to go after some of these guys, and I think glee is a good word, sometimes we pick up really, everybody does dumb things. We make mistakes and a lot of minor, stupid things that are not a big deal at all. Suddenly they're trying to ruin your whole career. Yeah. And so I just think that we've got too many people that feel called to point out all the mistakes us Christians make. Yeah. And I think that's a mistake.
Right. All right. Phil, we can do this all day,
it's fun.
man.
I'm
grateful to
spend
some time with you, man. And so grateful for your expertise, friends. Go. I'm telling you, go to philcooke.com. That's Cook with an E. Go to philcooke.com. Phil has tremendous resources and videos and content that's going to help empower you to scale your vision, to scale your brand at a time that you are needed in the world. The Lord put something unique and distinct on the inside of you, again, as unique as your fingerprints that only you can do. Phil, before we go, Phil, would you take some time and pray for our listeners today?
Sure, happy to do it. Father, I just pray, first of all, that you would help people understand that you have given them a unique calling, a unique purpose, and a unique reason for them being on the earth today, that you have a plan for their life that they may know nothing about. And I just pray that you would open that up in their lives. I just pray that you would help them see the calling that you have for them. And it's probably greater than anything they could have ever hoped for, anything they could have ever dreamed. And I pray that beyond all of that, you'll help them see that there is something out there for them to do, and that they will pursue that with everything they have. Yes. And because I think if we're going to make an impact in the culture today, we need to pursue it with everything we have. Father, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for bringing this to light. Yes. And I pray you'd help us all continue to be better examples of what you've called us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Good deal. Thanks, folks, for joining us again for Culture Conversation. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Phil, thanks so much, my friend.
I've enjoyed it. This is great.
Really an honor, sir.
Anytime.
All right. Bless you. We'll talk to you soon.